What happens when a late-night host decides to ambush their guest with personal questions they specifically agreed not to ask? Well, you are about to witness one of the most explosive moments in late-night television history. Miley Cyrus walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live set expecting a typical promotional interview, but what she got instead was a calculated attack on her personal life that left her absolutely furious. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure you subscribe and let me know in the comments what you think about hosts crossing the line with their guests. The atmosphere in the studio that night was already tense. Behind the scenes, Miley's team had been very clear about certain topics being off-limits. Her publicist had spent 20 minutes on the phone with the show's producers, explicitly stating that questions about her recent divorce proceedings were absolutely not to be discussed. The agreement was simple: promote the new album, talk about her upcoming tour, maybe throw in some lighthearted banter about her dogs. That was it. Nothing more, nothing less. Jimmy Kimmel had other plans entirely. As the cameras rolled and the audience settled in, you could see something mischievous in his eyes. He had that look that regular viewers know all too well, the one that says he is about to stir up some serious trouble. Miley walked out looking absolutely stunning in a black leather jacket and ripped jeans, waving to the crowd with her signature confident smile. She had no idea what was coming. The interview started innocently enough. Jimmy complimented her new look, made a joke about her always changing her style, and Miley laughed along genuinely. She seemed relaxed, even playful, as she settled into the guest chair. The audience was eating it up, laughing at her witty responses about her creative process and her love for her fans. Everything seemed perfectly normal for the first few minutes. Then Jimmy started testing the waters. He began with what seemed like innocent questions about her personal growth and maturity. Miley answered thoughtfully, talking about how she had learned to set boundaries in her life and how important it was for her to protect her mental health. The conversation was flowing naturally, and you could see her guard starting to come down slightly. But Jimmy was not satisfied with surface-level responses. He kept pushing, asking more probing questions about her relationships and her past. Miley started to shift uncomfortably in her chair, her smile becoming more forced. She tried to redirect the conversation back to her music, mentioning her new single and how excited she was for fans to hear it. Jimmy nodded along, but you could tell he was not really listening. He was planning his next move. The first real red flag came when Jimmy brought up her social media presence. He started reading some of her recent posts out loud, analyzing them in a way that felt invasive and inappropriate. Miley's expression changed noticeably. The playful sparkle in her eyes was replaced by something much more guarded. She politely asked him to move on to other topics, but Jimmy was just getting warmed up. He then made a comment about her having a lot of opinions lately, implying that she should stick to making music instead of speaking out on social issues. Miley's jaw tightened visibly. She took a deep breath and responded with more composure than most people would have managed, explaining that artists have always used their platforms to speak about things that matter to them. But you could see the frustration building behind her eyes. Jimmy was not backing down. In fact, he seemed to be enjoying watching her squirm. He made another jab about celebrities, thinking they know everything, and Miley finally snapped back with some bite in her voice. She told him that she had every right to use her voice, and that maybe he should focus on his own show instead of policing what other people say online. The audience was starting to sense the tension. The laughter was becoming more scattered and uncertain. People were shifting in their seats, unsure whether this was part of the show or if things were genuinely getting heated. Jimmy, however, seemed to be feeding off the energy. He was like a predator who had caught the scent of blood. That is when he decided to go for the kill. Despite the clear agreements that had been made beforehand, despite the explicit instructions from her team, Jimmy looked directly at Miley and asked about her divorce. Not in a supportive way, not with empathy or understanding, but with the kind of smug satisfaction that comes from knowing you are about to make someone deeply uncomfortable on national television. Miley's face went completely white. For a moment, she was speechless, staring at him in absolute disbelief. The audience fell silent, sensing that something had just gone very, very wrong. You could practically hear a pin drop in that studio as everyone waited to see how she would respond to this blatant violation of trust. Jimmy sat there with that insufferable smirk on his face, clearly proud of himself for landing what he thought was a gotcha moment. He had no idea that he had just crossed a line that would change everything. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of what was about to become one of the most talked about moments in late-night television history. Miley took a long, deep breath, her hands gripping the arms of her chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and controlled, but there was a dangerous edge to it that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. She looked Jimmy straight in the eye and said something that would set off a chain reaction nobody saw coming. She looked Jimmy straight in the eye and said, "Are you seriously going to sit there and pretend like we did not have an entire conversation about what was off limits tonight?" Her voice was steady, but the fury behind it was unmistakable. The audience was completely silent now. You could feel the electricity in the air as everyone realized they were witnessing something unprecedented. Jimmy tried to play it off with his typical dismissive laugh, the one he uses when he thinks he can charm his way out of any situation. He shrugged his shoulders and said, "Come on, Miley. Lighten up. It's just a question. Your fans want to know how you're doing." But his casual attitude only made things worse. You could see Miley's eyes flash with anger as she processed the fact that he was actually trying to gaslight her on live television. She leaned forward in her chair, her voice getting stronger with each word. "No, Jimmy, my fans want to hear my music. They want to know about my creative process and my upcoming projects. They do not need you prying into my personal life when you specifically promised you would not go there." The conviction in her voice was powerful, and you could see some audience members nodding in agreement. Jimmy was clearly not expecting this level of pushback. He probably thought she would just answer the question and move on, like so many other celebrities do when they get caught off guard. But Miley was not about to be bullied by some late-night host who thought he could manipulate her for ratings. She continued, "You know what this is really about? This is about you thinking you can ambush me because you assume I will just sit here and take it." The host tried to interrupt her, raising his hand dismissively. Miley, hold on," he said with that condescending tone that made everyone's skin crawl. "I think you are overreacting here. This is late-night television. We ask tough questions. That's what we do." His attempt to minimize her legitimate anger was absolutely infuriating to watch. Miley was having none of it. She stood up slightly in her chair, her posture becoming more confrontational. "Tough questions? Is that what you call violating an agreement that your own producers made with my team? Is that what you call ambushing someone who came here as a favor to promote their work?" Her voice was rising now, and you could see the passion and frustration of someone who had been pushed too far. Jimmy made the mistake of trying to be cute about it. He turned to the audience with that fake, confused expression and said, "I guess some people can't handle a little heat in the kitchen." The audience response was mixed at best, with more people looking uncomfortable than laughing. But that comment was the final straw for Miley. She shot back immediately. "Heat in the kitchen? Are you kidding me right now? This is not about handling heat. This is about basic respect and professionalism, something you clearly know nothing about." Her words cut through the studio like a knife, and even Jimmy seemed taken aback by the intensity of her response. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Jimmy tried to regain control by changing tactics, attempting to play the victim. "Look, I'm sorry if I offended you, but I'm just doing my job here. Sometimes that means asking questions that might be uncomfortable." His fake apology was transparent and pathetic, and Miley saw right through it. She laughed, but it was not a happy laugh. It was the kind of bitter laugh that comes when someone has completely lost patience with another person's nonsense. Your job? Your job is to entertain people, not to ambush your guests and then act like they are the problem when they call you out on it. You want to know what your real job should be? Learning how to treat people with basic human decency. Jimmy was starting to look genuinely flustered now. His usual smooth-talking persona was cracking under the pressure of someone who refused to be intimidated. He tried to take back control by addressing the audience directly. "Folks, this is live television for you. Sometimes things get a little heated, but that's what makes it interesting, right?" He was desperately trying to frame this as entertainment rather than the professional disaster it was becoming. But Miley was not about to let him off the hook that easily. She turned to face the audience herself, speaking directly to them with raw honesty. "You know what's really interesting? Watching a grown man try to justify breaking his word because he thought it would make good television. That's the real show here tonight, folks." The audience was completely captivated now. This was not scripted banter or playful celebrity drama. This was real, raw, and utterly compelling. You could see people in the crowd looking back and forth between Miley and Jimmy, trying to process what they were witnessing. Jimmy was clearly losing this battle, and he knew it. He tried one more desperate attempt to regain the upper hand by going on the offensive. "You know what, Miley? Maybe the problem is that you cannot handle being a public figure. Maybe you need to grow thicker skin if you want to play in this world. His words were cruel and calculated, designed to hurt her and make her look weak. But Miley was ready for him. She stood up from her chair completely now, her full height making her look even more formidable. Thick skin? Let me tell you something about thick skin, Jimmy. I have been in this business since I was a kid. I have dealt with more criticism, more scrutiny, and more people trying to tear me down than you could ever imagine. But what I will not do is sit here and let some talk show host with a massive ego think he can walk all over me just because he has a platform. The studio was electric. This was the kind of television moment that people would be talking about for years. Jimmy was clearly rattled, but he was also getting defensive and mean. He shot back. Well, maybe if you made better choices in your personal life, people would not have so much to criticize. It was a low blow, and everyone in the room knew it. Miley's eyes flashed with pure fire. She took a step closer to his desk, her voice becoming dangerously quiet. Did you just say that to me? Did you really just sit there and judge my personal choices while you hide behind your little desk and your writers and your producers? The menace in her voice was palpable, and you could see Jimmy starting to realize he had pushed things way too far. She was not done. You want to talk about choices, Jimmy? Let's talk about your choice to be a manipulative, unprofessional bully who thinks he can say whatever he wants because he has a television show. Let's talk about your choice to break your word and then act like I'm the problem for calling you out on it. Her words were hitting their mark, and Jimmy was clearly struggling to come up with a response. The moment had reached a boiling point, and everyone in the studio could feel that something big was about to happen. Miley was standing at the edge of his desk now, her presence commanding the entire room. Jimmy was shrinking back in his chair, finally realizing that he had picked a fight with someone who was not going to back down. Jimmy was shrinking back in his chair, finally realizing that he had picked a fight with someone who was not going to back down. But instead of apologizing or trying to de-escalate the situation, he made the worst possible choice. He decided to double down on his arrogance. Looking directly at her with a smug expression, he said, "You know what, Miley? This is exactly the kind of dramatic behavior that got you into trouble in the first place." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The audience gasped audibly, and you could see people in the front row physically recoil from the cruelty of his comment. Even his own band members looked uncomfortable, shifting awkwardly in their seats as they realized their boss had just crossed a line that should never be crossed. Miley went completely still for a moment, her face a mask of controlled fury. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet that the entire studio had to strain to hear her. "What did you just say to me?" The question was loaded with danger, and everyone in the room knew that Jimmy had just made a catastrophic mistake. Jimmy, either too stupid or too arrogant to realize the gravity of what he had done, actually repeated himself. "I said this dramatic behavior is exactly what got you into trouble. Maybe if you learned to control your emotions better, you would not have so many problems in your personal life." His words were like gasoline on a fire, and the explosion that followed was spectacular. Miley's composure finally shattered completely. She slammed her hand down on his desk so hard that his coffee mug jumped, and her voice filled the entire studio. "How dare you? How dare you sit there and psychoanalyze me like you have any idea what I have been through? You do not know me, you do not know my life, and you sure as hell do not get to judge me." The audience was stunned into complete silence. This was not television anymore. This was a real human being defending herself against a bully who had pushed her past her breaking point. Jimmy tried to interrupt, but Miley was not having it. She held up her hand to silence him, her eyes blazing with righteous anger. "No, you are going to listen to me now, since you seem to think you know so much about my life. You want to talk about dramatic behavior? Let's talk about a grown man who thinks it's okay to ambush his guests, break his promises, and then attack them personally when they stand up for themselves. That's the real drama here, Jimmy, and it's all coming from you." Jimmy was clearly panicking now. He could see his show spiraling completely out of control, and he was desperately trying to salvage the situation. "Miley, please, let's just calm down and have a normal conversation," he pleaded, but his voice was shaking and unconvincing. Miley laughed bitterly. "Normal conversation? You think this is normal? You think attacking someone's personal life and then gaslighting them about it is normal? This is not normal, Jimmy. This is you being a terrible host and an even worse human being." Her words were devastating, and you could see Jimmy physically flinch with each accusation. She started pacing now, her energy too intense to contain in one spot. You know what the really sad part is? I actually used to respect you. I used to think you were one of the good ones in this business. But tonight, you have shown me exactly who you really are. You are just another bully with a platform who thinks he can say whatever he wants because he has power. The studio was completely captivated. This was raw, unfiltered truth being spoken to power, and everyone could feel the weight of the moment. Jimmy tried once more to regain control, his voice getting defensive and nasty again. Look, if you cannot handle being asked questions about your public life, maybe you should not be in the public eye. That was it. That was the moment that sealed his fate. Miley stopped pacing and turned to face him directly, her voice becoming deadly calm. You know what, Jimmy? You are absolutely right. I should not be in the public eye, at least not this part of it. I should not be sitting here letting some pathetic excuse for a host treat me like garbage for his own entertainment. She reached down and unclipped her microphone, the sound echoing through the studio speakers. I am done with this interview. I am done with this show. And I am done with you. The finality in her voice was unmistakable. This was not a tantrum or a dramatic exit for show. This was a person who had reached their limit and was taking back their power. Jimmy was starting to panic visibly now. He could see his entire show falling apart in real time, and he was scrambling to save face. Miley, come on, do not do this. We can work this out. Let's just finish the interview like professionals. But his plea fell on deaf ears. Miley was already walking around the desk, heading toward the exit. She paused just long enough to deliver one final devastating blow. Professionals? You want to talk about being professional? Professionals keep their word. Professionals treat their guests with respect. Professionals do not ambush people and then act like victims when they get called out. You are not a professional, Jimmy. You are just a bully with a television show. The audience was on the edge of their seats, watching history unfold before their eyes. Jimmy made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Miley, please think about what you are doing. This is live television. People are watching. But his words only made things worse. She turned back to face him one final time, her voice cutting through the studio like a blade. Good. I hope they are watching. I hope they see exactly what kind of person you really are when the cameras are rolling. Maybe next time, you will think twice before you decide to attack someone just because you think it will make good television. With that, she walked straight toward the exit, her head held high and her dignity intact. The audience did not know whether to clap or stay silent, so they did both, creating an awkward mix of scattered applause and stunned silence. Jimmy sat at his desk, his face red with embarrassment and anger, completely at a loss for words. As Miley reached the edge of the stage, she turned back one last time and addressed the audience directly. Thank you all for being here tonight. I am sorry you had to witness this, but sometimes you have to stand up for yourself, even when it is uncomfortable. I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Her grace under pressure was remarkable, and you could see genuine respect in the faces of the audience members. She disappeared behind the curtain, leaving Jimmy alone at his desk with a studio full of people who had just watched him get completely destroyed by someone who refused to be bullied. The silence that followed was deafening, and you could see Jimmy struggling to figure out how to salvage what was left of his show. He tried to make a joke about it, but his voice was shaking and the audience was not laughing. The damage was done, and everyone in that studio knew they had just witnessed something that would be talked about for years to come. Jimmy had picked a fight with the wrong person, and he had lost spectacularly. This was the moment that proved you cannot just push people around because you have a platform. Miley Cyrus had shown the world what it looks like when someone stands up for themselves with courage, dignity, and unwavering strength. She had turned what was supposed to be her humiliation into Jimmy's complete and utter defeat. What did you think of Miley's incredible stand against Jimmy Kimmel's unprofessional behavior? Subscribe for more incredible celebrity confrontations, and let me know in the comments. Do you think more celebrities should stand up to disrespectful hosts like this?